You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Today, my guests are as interesting as they are different. One has authored, it's just published, a dual biography about the first two female Supremes. Court justices, that is, not the memorable Motown group. The second guest just returned from a 30-month deployment in Iraq and environs. That can't have been easy on a woman, even if she is a captain. And the third steers an organization doing life-saving stem cell research. All three of these women are just so damn cool. But before we get to them, first, we need to look inside the headlines. Finally, the EEOC, the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, is investigating gender discrimination in Hollywood, and it has sent letters to women directors requesting that they share details of the roadblocks and biases that they've encountered in their careers. The agency is responding to requests from the American Civil Liberties Union that were made to state and federal governmental bodies, but last May, asking them to investigate major studios, networks, and talent agencies for overwhelmingly hiring men. Research by the Center for the Study of Women in Television and Film shows that in 2014 and 2015, women constituted 26% of executive producers, 38% of producers, 26% of writers, 14% of directors, and 21% of editors. And if you have or still do downloaded the Status of Women in the U.S. Media 2015 from the Women's Media Center, it's available for free download on the site womensmediacenter.com. This will not surprise you, but it's a bit of good news that the EOC is finally looking into it. Then a second item inside the headlines. This one garnered a small headline, but I'm afraid mostly fell through the cracks or into the world of ho-hum, what else is new. A survey by the Association of American Universities found that in 4 years of college, more than 1/4 of undergraduate women at a large group of leading universities have been sexually assaulted by force or when they were incapacitated. It's one of the largest studies of its kind. It showed that 27.2% of female college seniors reported that since entering college, they'd experienced some kind of unwanted sexual contact. The survey bolstered findings from previous studies, but it stands out, this one, for its sheer size. 150,000 students at 27 colleges and universities took part last spring. And the colleges involved many of the nation's elite Ivy League schools, except for Princeton. The survey found that even in the most serious assaults, those involving penetration, which was almost half of the assaults, almost 3/4 of the victims there didn't report the episode to anyone in authority. And the reason they gave for not reporting was that they didn't think the episodes would be considered serious enough, and they felt ashamed, and they didn't think they'd be taken seriously. This is still in 2015. Most of the institutions in the studies released their own figures from the survey, and several of the supposedly most respected ones had some of the highest rates of sexual assault by force or incapacitation. 34.6% at Yale, 34.3% at the University of Michigan, all that football, and 29.2% at Harvard. This is profoundly distressing. Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, the Democrat from New York, one of my senators, praised the study but expressed impatience that Congress still had not acted to force colleges to improve their handling of sexual assault. She asked, how many surveys will it take before we act with the urgency these crimes demand? Indeed. And the last little item in this week's Inside the Headlines is enough to make you bonkers. Recently, toward the end of last month, A judge ruled that employers do not need to provide insurance coverage for contraception, even if their objections are, quote, moral rather than religious. This was a federal judge. The case concerned a group called March for Life, which was formed after the Supreme Court recognized a constitutional right to abortion in Roe v. Wade in 1973. March for Life, according to the group itself, is a nonprofit, non-religious, pro-life organization that opposes methods of contraception it says can amount to abortion. This includes, wait for it, hormonal products, intrauterine devices, and emergency contraceptives. Although most scientists would disagree that these methods of contraception are equivalent to abortion. So President Obama's health care law and the related regulations require most employers to provide free contraception coverage to female workers. But there are exceptions, which I don't even think there should be, and accommodations for religious groups and their affiliates. I think this violates church and state separation, but never mind. Now it has opened the door for non-religious groups. So March for Life sued the Department of Health and Human Services and other agencies, arguing that the government had violated equal protection principles by treating it differently from similarly situated employers. And the government responded it had a rational basis for the differing treatment because the group is not religious and not a church. And Judge Richard Leon of the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia rejected the government's defense, saying that this oversimplifies the issue and misses the point. Judge Leon ruled, quote, the characteristic that warrants protection, an employment relationship based in part on a shared objection to abortifacients, is separate altogether from theism. Stated differently, when HHS claims to be protecting religious beliefs, it is actually protecting a moral philosophy about the sanctity of life, and so forth. The government is likely to appeal the decision to the U.S. State Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, and I certainly hope that it does. But I suppose, trying to find something good about this, I suppose it simply teaches us that non-religious people in some circumstances can be just as dumb and sexist and appalled by women controlling our own reproductive rights as deeply faith-based religious groups. Somehow, I don't find that particularly comforting. And now it's time for our first guest. Linda Hirshman is a retired distinguished professor of philosophy and women's studies at Brandeis. She's the author of a number of books: Get to Work, A Manifesto for Women of the World, The Woman's Guide to Law School, and Hard Bargains, The Politics of Sex, among them. And she's just out with a new book that we're going to hear all about. Linda Hirshman. Linda, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
Well, you've done a remarkable book here, a dual biography about the first two women on the Supreme Court, Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and their relationship to the court, to the women's movement, to each other. It is a fascinating work. It's called Sisters-in-Law, How Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg Went to the Supreme Court and Changed the World. And they did, although never enough. So tell how this book came to be. I mean, you've done other remarkable books about the women's movement and women's lives before that I've just mentioned in the introduction. But tell how this one came to be.
So I'm interested in social movements. That's really what I write about. And I was astonished to learn that there was not a serious big biography of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the Thurgood Marshall of the women's movement, as Bill Clinton called her.
Exactly.
And so it seemed like a real hole in the history because so much of the women's movement has moved forward through the law.
Yes.
And she was at the center of it. So I decided that I would write about her. And then if you think about it, biographies of Supreme Court justices are actually not that interesting generally. But they're interesting when the justice changed the world. So if you're thinking about Supreme Court justices who changed the world for women, it's hard not to think about Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman on the Supreme Court. And although there was a biography of her, it did not focus on her role in changing the world for women. And indeed, many of the really important decisions that she made for women aren't even in there.
Yeah, well, because also she got better as she went along. I mean, she did not start out in any, at least to those of us on the outside, in any way, shape, or form as a feminist, whereas Ruth already had a history of pleading discrimination cases. I mean, she was one of ours, you know. But O'Connor, as time went on, and I must say, especially since unfortunately she's not on the court any longer, she has become much more vocal and much more feminist and much more awesome. Maybe Ruth had the effect on her. Certainly your book shows the effects they had on each other.
You know, one of the things I learned, and people will learn if they read the book, is that, interestingly, one of O'Connor's very first decisions on the court, within months of her arrival on the court, was a major feminist decision. She ordered the sex integration of the nursing program at the Mississippi University for Women in a case called Hogan versus Mississippi, and she was the critical swing vote. The court was split 4-4 when she arrived, and she cast a vote for sexual equality right after she got there. And if you look at her archives, her files and stuff, as I did, because a lot of them are in Phoenix, where I live, you see what I call the surprisingly radical files of an apparently conservative woman.
Interesting.
She was collecting stories about the feminist movement in the late 60s, just like Ruth Bader Ginsburg was.
Interesting, very interesting. I know that she made a point of saying that she may be the first woman on the Supreme Court, but she hoped that she wasn't the last. She intended not to be the last, and she worked hard, you know, at the idea of of not being the one and only token. You know, and today I wouldn't say I won't be satisfied until it reflects population, which means it would be slightly more than half of the 9. It would be 5 of the 9 should be not only women but feminists. But we're up to 3 now. We've lost O'Connor. O'Connor, for so many years, was the swing vote, and it seems to me, at least, tell me if I'm wrong, that she swung more liberal, progressive, and feminist as time went on. Is that a misperception?
She had an Indian summer of liberalism after her vote in Bush v. Gore. So from 2000 to 2005, the end of when she retired, the opinions were more liberal. But her position on women's matters was pretty consistent. That was the most liberal part of her jurisprudence, even before 2000. And it was a moderate vote in favor of women's rights, and then keeping the remedies relatively tight-fisted.
Well, the first one in is usually not one of ours. In fact, it's unusual to even have the second one in be as clearly one of our own as Ruth has been. And the effect that her presence had on O'Connor is probably incalculable, and vice versa.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg regarded Sandra Day O'Connor as a pioneer.
Yes.
And she was very important to Ginsburg, and Ginsburg treated her with enormous regard. And Sandra Day O'Connor was really happy that the second one was, in O'Connor's words, as knowledgeable and competent a justice as Ginsburg. O'Connor very much wanted to break a path for women and not to be the only one. And who could you wish for better to follow you than Ruth Bader Ginsburg?
Exactly. She had been a champion in the law for women for a long, long time, you know.
And she is, in fact, astonishingly brilliant and competent.
Yes, she is.
Wow.
The one thing I've never been able to figure out, maybe you have an insight after this dual biography, is, and I've never asked her this because, you know, when I'm in the presence of Ruth, I mean, you don't want to ask her this particular question, but it is, I know you love opera. I know Scalia loves opera, but that is the only bond I can see. How can you be actual social friends with this troglodyte, is what I would like to say, but I don't. Do you have an insight?
Well, Ginsburg is very inner-directed, and when she finds someone that shares some aspect of her passionate interests, it's valuable and rare to her, and it isn't just the opera. They both love good writing. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I learned in the book process was that they correct each other's opinions.
Oh, my God.
Right. Even where it's, you know, going to come out very badly in their writing. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg is an amazing editor. And so they share a love of the language and of the proper use of the language. And if I had to speculate, that's what I would say. I would say she cares very much about the few things that she cares very much about, and when she finds someone who shares one of those interests, he's valuable to her.
Well, that's kind of what I figured, because I from what I do know of her and knowing her, but it does seem to me to be a stretch when it comes to Scalia. Anyway, that's my prejudice. This is a really remarkable book. How long did it take you? This is a work of amazing scholarship.
Thank you very much. I was fortunate that the archives were in two places that are very easy to use. One was in the Library of Congress. So I spent a great deal of time in Washington, and the other were in the various state libraries in Phoenix, Arizona, where I live in the winter. So I was the librarians were very helpful in enabling me to do this work. The ACLU archives are in Princeton, so that was a little more of a stretch. But the truth of the matter is that I had just lost my husband. My husband had just died when I started writing the book.
Oh, I'm sorry.
And thank you. And, you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg said it perfectly. You get through that year thanks to the good work that you have.
Yes, yes.
And she said that about Marty. She said, I got through this year thanks to the good job Marty helped me get.
Yeah.
And I got through that first year thanks to the good work that I had. So I was working pretty hard.
Having work that you love
yes.
to do is the greatest healer that I know for anything that you need to get through. It's remarkable.
Sandra Day O'Connor said the same thing after her breast cancer.
Yes, yes. Well, it's just it's a remarkable book. I mean, one of them was a Goldwater girl and a Western rancher upbringing, you know, cowgirl
right.
almost, and the other was
right.
a Brooklyn-born Jewish opera lover, intellectual, strong feminist, and they created a real friendship, and they affected history in so doing. And I thank you for documenting that. Again, the book is called Sisters in Law: How Sandra Day O'Connor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg Went to the Supreme Court and Changed the World. And the author is Linda Redlich Hirshman. And I thank you for being with us on Women's Media Center Live.
And thank you for what you do at the Women's Media Center.
We have to take a short break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I will be back in just a moment with a foreign policy expert and military captain who is just back from a long deployment in the Middle East.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back. My next guest, Asha Castleberry is a U.S. foreign policy expert and a U.S. military officer with the rank of captain. She is a graduate of the Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs with a concentration in international security policy and specialization in the Middle East. She also served in the 2008 peacekeeping operation in Nicaragua, and in 2011 she worked with the Military Staff Committee at the U.S. Mission at the United Nations. She recently completed a 30-month deployment in the Middle East, and since 2014, with ISIL in making its incursion into Iraq, she served for Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve in Iraq and Kuwait. Here is Captain Asha Castleberry. Captain Asha Castleberry, Asha for short, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much.
You have the most impressive CV in terms of the military and foreign policy that it makes me want to salute, and I am a decidedly unmilitary person. But your experience is so broad, and you've just come back from completing a 30-month deployment in the Middle East. So I want to talk about a lot of things, the U.S.-Iran deal, the women's leadership in general in the national security system and in the military. In particular, can't have been easy for an African-American woman to be that consulted.
Yes, I just came back from a 30-month deployment.
Let's talk about countering ISIL, or the so-called Islamic State. What are we doing wrong? What should we be doing differently?
Well, it's a very complicated situation because it's an international effort led by the United States. So what we're doing right is that the fact that we are allowing the Iraqis to take the lead in this, and the Iraqis are working on their own pace. So when the counter ISIL mission started, when we back in about last year during Ramadan, we were pushed forth to kind of assess the situation, what was going on, and the Iraqis were pretty much their entire military collapsed, and we were helping them to repair, and while we were helping them to repair their military, you also had a situation they're fighting a threat. So it's like you're fighting a war, or you're fighting someone with a broken leg.
Yes.
So many divisions had collapsed at that time. So the one thing we learned prior to this mission is that we don't want to meddle or intervene too much into the mission. So we're allowing the Iraqis to really determine their future on how they want this to look. And the big thing too is that really kind of slows down the progression there is the political instability. So when we first came in, the former prime minister, he was there, and then the Iraqis voted him out and brought in the new prime minister, right. Prime Minister Abadi. So what the United States wants, or the rest of the world wants, is to kind of expedite this process in a way. But then again, we all have to respect the pace of the Iraqis.
The problem seems to be that the Iraq leadership, and for that matter the population, it was a sort of pasted together state after World War II, and it is so fragmented itself between Shia and Sunni and Kurds.
Right.
And Yazidi, and so many different ethnic groups that are at each other's throats, and major religious schism, that it doesn't seem to be a single voice of a fabricated state, e.g. Iraq.
Right. Well, what the Iraqis are noticing, and I will definitely acknowledge that problem because it does exist, but what the Iraqis are definitely acknowledging, in order to ultimately defeat that threat, ISIS, or what we also call as Daesh in Arabic.
Yes, Daesh.
In order to defeat it, we all have to work together, whether you're a Kurd, a Sunni, or Shia.
Let's talk for a minute about your own experiences as a woman in a commanding position in the region. How has that been? Can't be smooth or easy, but it must be interesting.
Yes, I had a very, very interesting experience because prior to my assignment, and this is not what the U.S. Army pretty much stands for. It's just, I would say, people just here and there within the U.S. Army. that don't really, we're very kind of shocked that I can actually work with our allies, meaning our allies that, a majority of them are Arab, Muslims that are males. And they didn't think that a woman can make a difference in that or work well with them because they're saying, oh, you're secondary, they don't respect you as enough. But when I actually done that for a very long time, I've actually had a great experience, and I've learned that they actually do have respect for you and they do work for you. So those perceptions or those stereotypes that I was told to me prior to my assignment were totally off and totally wrong. And then over time, I grew to be a very, very important asset to my organization, to my unit, to where I helped out with, representing my unit and bringing them in with working with our allies. So a little bit, one reason is because culturally, they do respect people who work with them on a consistent basis. And also, I think over time my Arabic got a little bit better, but but the cultural respect is if you come here and you work with me and you respect me and we listen to each other, we can work well together and you become an asset. So some people don't understand that method or that style. And I have talked to other women that have done the same thing in the U.S. military. So I think we have a natural skill set to work closely with our allies in a different way compared to an average male, but we just don't know that.
And ideally, a better way, ideally. I mean, it sounds that way. This also, the problem with peacekeeping forces, whether U.S. or UN even, has been a severe problem because the UN peacekeeping forces have often moved into areas to, quote, keep peace and wound up raping village women, abusing local populations, etc., depending on where they are from, what countries they are from, because it's an international force, but obviously it's made up of individuals from different countries. And to me, the answer to that has always been more women in peacekeeping forces.
Yes, I actually support Resolution 1325. I actually spoke at a panel back in 2009 about peacekeeping, women in peacekeeping, advancing their leadership in peacekeeping or recruiting more women, because what they've noticed over time is that a woman or a female peacekeeper has a unique way of communicating with the local community or the local people, especially when it comes to refugees or IDPs, because a majority of them are women and children. So
IDPs are internally displaced peoples.
Yes, yes. So the UN noticed over time that recruiting more women in peacekeeping is actually an asset for the peacekeeping operations.
What future do you see for women in leadership in the armed forces? Because, of course, there's been so much controversy over integration of the armed forces and all of the rapes and by one's own colleagues, by one's own comrades, and women in the military mobilizing about that. Just say a word on that, and how come you're still walking upright?
I think I'm very optimistic, actually, that I do see more female leaders growing up in the system in the U.S. military, especially now that we have women that are passing Ranger School. I think that is just amazing accomplishment. Just to see that now that we'll have women wearing a Ranger tab, I think it's just so amazing, and it's great, and it's showing that there's some sort of progression going on within the U.S. military, but we still have a long way to go. As right now those women are trying to get into Ranger units, and there's some situation there where they're trying to fix that up. So we still have a long way to go, but there is still some sort of sign of progression. Now, what I want to see is more women as far as serving as commanders in combat.
Yes.
So, especially overseas, because with a woman who's in an infantry unit that is a commander overseas, other countries see the same thing, and then it inspires them to get more women in their military to serve.
I see.
So Yes. So there's some progression going on, but we still have a long way to go.
Well, with you on the case, next time you're a guest speaker at the State Department, you tell them, sister.
I sure will.
Thank you so much, Asha. Captain Castleberry, thank you for being with us on Women's Media Center Live, and you take care of yourself.
Okay, thank you so much.
And now it's time for the Surrealism Corner. If you are a woman, dear listener, like me, and if, like me, you live in the Northern Hemisphere, then you may find yourself actually grateful that fall is coming rapidly and cooler weather, because then you have an excuse for wearing leggings and, shawls and sweaters and things which you did not have as an excuse all summer long while you froze in air-conditioned buildings. Women are always complaining that the air conditioning is too strong, and we've been called too sensitive and making it up and imagining. Well, now, recently, two scientists, both of them Dutch, Dr. Boris Kingma and his colleague Wouter van Marken-Lichtenbelt, have found, in fact, in a study published in the journal Nature Climate Change, that most office buildings set temperatures based on a decades-old formula that uses the metabolic rates, you guessed it, of guys. Most buildings' thermostats follow a thermal comfort model that was developed in the 1960s and which considers such factors as air temperature, airspeed, vapor pressure, and clothing insulation. But it is based on the metabolic resting rate, which is how fast we generate heat, based on a 40-year-old man weighing 154 pounds. There you have it. Women, of course, now constitute half the workforce, and we usually have slower metabolic rates than men, mostly because we're smaller and we have more body fat, which has lower metabolic rates than muscle. In fact, the study says the current model may overestimate resting heat production of women by up to 35%. The moral of the story is change the formula. Lower the air conditioning coolth, or rather raise the temperature so that we don't freeze in the summer. And if women are asking, let's turn on the heat now in the autumn, do so. Or at least find a compromise between the two metabolisms that isn't assuming the male is the generic. Brrr. Another quick break coming up here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and if you've ever wondered what is the latest on that great possible miracle of stem cell research, hang on, because that's what we're talking about right after the break.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again. My next guest, Susan Solomon, returns to the program. She's been on before with us. She was a healthcare advocate, and 10 years ago she founded and today is the chief executive officer of the New York Stem Cell Foundation. It channels private philanthropy toward the most promising stem cell research, and New York Stem Cell Foundation has raised nearly $100 million for such research, both in its own laboratory and in the major medical institutions around the world that it persists in supporting. Here for the latest on stem cell research is Susan Solomon. Susan Solomon, welcome back to Women's Media Center Live.
It's wonderful to be here again. Thank you so much, Robin.
Well, the first time that you were on, we talked mostly about IWISE, which stands for the New York Stem Cell Foundation's Initiative on Women in Science and Engineering. This time around, I want to talk about the other work of the foundation and about what's really happening, the latest in stem cell research. But bring us up to speed on how iWise is doing, because it's an important initiative for women in science and engineering and medicine.
Well, I have very good news to report. We actually are now moving on to the adoption of the 7 strategies, and we're working with funders, because we really think that actually the best way to get things implemented is by working with the funders of medical research. They all consider it important, and I noted that recently there was this week a McKinsey report on really the issues surrounding women in a variety of fields. And we have an iWise report card that we are working on with the group, and that is going to be a reporting mechanism for all of the institutions that are in the field, so that they can really have a look themselves and get a clearer understanding of where they need to really step up their game. And we do think that a lot of this is unconscious bias,
right?
And it really is about awareness. But once you're aware of it, then you have to have you have to do something about it and step up, and that's where the 7 strategies come in.
And Susan,
we just think gender equality is essential.
Well, and there you go. Yes, I adore you. And where can people get the 7 strategies by going to the website of New York Stem Cell Foundation?
Yes, they go to nyscf.org, New York Stem Cell Foundation.org, and it's right there. And
the initiative is called iWise, IWISE. And it's fantastic. I mean, they're very practical ways of doing this, so that people can't wring their hands and say, well, we would, but we just can't find qualified women, or we would, but we hadn't thought of that, or, it's a way of really helping change those unconscious or conscious biases. And I think the approach going through funders is very witty and wise itself. So now,
well, the one commitment I did make, Robin, was to make sure that anyone who spent time on the iWise initiative, it wasn't simply going to be another paper and another meeting where people wrung their hands.
Yes.
And that's why I said, let's come up with a number of things we can do, have most of them not cost money, so that you really, I wanted to remove excuses. And this is very practical. Here are very specific solutions, as you say, as opposed to people saying, oh, this is terrible, now what do we do?
Or being abstract. It's very, very refreshing. And I think so many of these apply not only to science fields, but across the board. Yes,
and we have wonderful women scientists at NYSIF, and, it's really important to support female innovators.
Yes. Oh, yes. Big applause you're hearing from my end. So again, it's New York Stem Cell Foundation, nyscf.org. And if you go there and you look at the iWise section, the initiative on women in science and engineering, you will find these 7 concrete, very helpful points, and what the work of iWise is doing. Now, the other work of the foundation and stem cell research in general. Let me just let you loose on that.
So I think there's a huge amount in the news about precision medicine, personalized medicine, and our mission is to actually put that into effect. And along the way, we're doing that in several specific disease areas, so neurodegenerative diseases. We've made great strides in actually understanding what Alzheimer's is and teasing out some of the approaches that we can take for early detection. And in Parkinson's disease, ALS, there's a clinical trial that we're deeply involved in that is now recruiting patients. One of our inaugural pioneering prize winners actually has a clinical trial that's just transplanted the first patient with a form of macular degeneration in England. So one of the big issues with using stem cell research and conducting personalized or precision medicine is you have to have the technologies so that you can do things on a large scale, so that we can really understand how diversity, our diverse genetics. I mean, you and I, we're similar, but we're really quite different.
Right.
And so we developed the NICEF Global Stem Cell Array, which is the only actually technology that people have to understand how to make stem cells at a very large scale. So we've written software code and we've taught robots how to do the kind of repetitive activities, highly technical, but repetitive actions of making stem cell lines and then turning them into the cells for our heart and brains and livers, so that we will really have avatars for ourselves. This is real, it's not science fiction, and it exists today in the NICEF lab. And we're working with dozens and dozens of disease foundations and major medical institutions all over the world. And we really see NICEF, now that we are celebrating our 10th anniversary, as essential connective tissue. Our goal is to be a bridge to cures, and I'm very happy to say that we actually have developed a technique to prevent the transmission of mitochondrial disease, which actually affects several times the number of people who are diagnosed with ALS. And these efforts are turning into very, very concrete approaches, treatments, and then eventually cures for people.
Susan,
and we work with academic institutions, we work with the technology sector, we work with pharmaceutical and biotech companies, and we're bringing a new model of research, a new approach to research that eliminates a tremendous amount of redundancy and really addresses a need to have an integrated approach and not a siloed approach to cures. When we started in 2005, the goal was to accelerate cures and treatments, but what we needed to do was actually build an entire field. There was a huge amount of conversation about stem cell research. There are actually very few people around to do it. We now have 50 scientists in our own laboratory, and together with researchers all around the world that are supported by NICEF. They're NICEF innovators, the community of over 120 researchers worldwide, and these include the developer of the new gene editing techniques, people who have invented optogenetics, which is a way of using light to understand pathways. And actually, I think my number is a little bit out of date. I think we actually have over 135 scientists. And we've created a community of the leading stem cell researchers and many of the leading neuroscientists in the world. And they come together and collaborate several times a year on a formal basis, and then extensively on an informal basis. And I and others at NICEF are speaking around the world. The diseases we're trying to deal with are huge. They have been intractable for many, many years, and this is a full international cross-border effort. And it also requires the patients, because it's the patients who are really keeping the pressure on. And so that's where we, as a patient-driven nonprofit organization that also is a major research institute, can actually affect change. I mean, personally, my son was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, many years ago, and I am absolutely determined that we will have a much better solution and eventually a cure for one of the more complicated diseases. And so earlier this year, when we and others make really wonderful stem cells that can respond to the sugar in the body, I said, all right, now let's tackle the really tough problem of how are we going to transplant those into people. And so we convened a meeting to invent a new field called immunoengineering.
Wow.
Because we can make all the cells we want in the laboratory, but that's why
the delivery system is the question then.
That's right, and that's why we at NICEF are focusing on the bridge to cures.
This is such a great age for science. I think in the future, if the species doesn't destroy the planet first, we'll look back on this period. They will look back on this period, and whether it's from water undiscovered on Mars to stem cell to breaking the code of the genome. I mean, it is a golden age of science, even with all the attacks from the troglodytes against science, but the work you do is invaluable on a personal level. As someone with Parkinson's, you know how much I appreciate the work that you do, and I thank you for that, and we will check in with you again. Again, the website is NYSC as in Charles, F.org, New York Stem Cell Foundation. It's worthy of support and attention. It's a great website to look at. And I thank you. And I thank you for being with us on Women's Media Center Live. And happy birthday, New York Stem Cell Foundation.
Robin, thank you so much, and delighted to be with you.
One last short pause here. I'm Robin Morgan. This is Women's Media Center Live. And after the break, we'll be right back with some fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And welcome back again. Just in time for some fighting words. Bang, bang, bang. That's the sound of me banging my head against the wall in frustration. Today's items in fighting words fall into the category of seeming good at first look and then on closer inspection, not so much. For example, Uganda, always one of our favorite places because of the rampant toxic homophobia there. In Uganda, the top court recently banned the practice of refunding bride price. This is normally livestock given by the groom to the bride's family. So when a marriage ends in divorce, supposedly you refund the bride price, and the top court banned the practice. The court agreed with activists that paying bride price in the first place undermines women's dignity, but they upheld the practice nonetheless. So, I mean, it's ridiculous. So it's sort of good news because one of the activists said that it was a victory. Studies by her group shows that many women were stuck in abusive marriages because divorce meant that their families would be obligated to refund the bride price. So that's the good news. But the bad news is, why in hell is there a bride price to begin with? Never mind tradition. However, it's not just a matter of the global south. Oh, no, no, no. In London, the heart of the previous empire. Last summer, there was a campaign to get permission from the Tower Hamlets Council to open a museum celebrating the women of the East End, which is one of London's most historically, how shall we say, troubled districts. So the application called that the center would be the first women's museum in Britain, and it would retell the history of the East End from the perception of poverty, crime, and social unrest, and it would be just an amazing, fantastic museum celebrating women. So local residents, however, once the museum was built and opened, last summer realized they got a different type of museum. The facade of the museum announced the Jack the Ripper Museum, dedicated to the man who murdered at least 5 women in the late 1880s in the East London, and whose identity still remains unknown. Of course, there are thousands of theories. The museum has tweeted several times about ripperology, the study of the infamous serial killer. The Tower Hamlets Council said that it was aware of the Jack the Ripper imagery and is investigating the extent to which unauthorized works may have been carried out at the premises. British understatement, to say the least. I hope that and trust that British feminists are on the case, and that, various witty defacements will be left in and around the museum, which is displaying posters of female torsos murdered around the time of the Jack the Ripper attacks. So there you go. Watch out for those women's history museums, which in fact turns out to be about killing women. And the last item is very strange, mixed messages. Tahrir, which means freedom in Arabic, Tahrir Hamad, who's a Palestinian, age 36, is kind of a pioneer. She recently became the first woman to be permitted to perform Muslim marriages in the Palestinian territories. Her former professor described her appointment as opening the door of a metastasizing evil. Honest to God, in a post that he posted on Facebook. So she, on the other hand, says, I didn't think of what people would think. I like taking risks. I wanted to show that women could do it. She's not the first Palestinian woman to occupy a position traditionally reserved for men in Muslim societies. In 2009, a liberal-minded jurist, Sheikh Taysir Tamimi, appointed the Palestinian territory's first 2 female Islamic court judges, who now rule on divorce, custody, and inheritance. Islamic courts oversee all family affairs for Muslims in the territories, just as Orthodox Jewish rabbinical courts do for Orthodox Jews. But with Miss Hamad, the appointment of the female judges was initially met with derision, and they're now an accepted part of the landscape, along with growing numbers of women who preach Islam to other women at Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem, Islam's 3rd holiest site. Now, keep in mind, they're allowed to preach it only to other women, but still, incremental, tiny little steps. Palestinian feminists welcomed the appointments, but said they were just a tiny start in addressing myriad problems in marital law and the entire marriage process, in unfair custody and alimony rules, in the failure to inform women of their rights. And these feminists claim that the obstacles are due to deep resistance from conservative judges and to paralysis in the Palestinian parliament. Nonetheless, since Tahrir Hamad was appointed, 2 more women have applied to become marriage celebrants. So that's the good news. Also in the good news is the way she conducts marriages. She asked one bride, who was age 22, if she consented to being married to a 23-year-old municipal worker. And the bride's mother was amazed. She said, "This woman gave space to ask my daughter what she wanted. When I was married, the celebrant didn't let me speak." In another ceremony, Tahrir Hamad turned to the teenage bride, asking if she had any conditions she wanted stipulated in her marriage contract. And the bride whispered, "I would like to finish my education." And later on, the bride said she hadn't realized that she could make her marriage conditional on her right to finish her studies until Ms. Hamad had asked her. That's all the good news. The bad news, or the it's all incremental, oh my God, more work to do department, is that even though she's qualified to become an Islamic judge, Tahrir Hamad said she was satisfied that she'd reached her professional pinnacle. You'd think this is contradictory, she says, but I wouldn't be a judge. I consider myself too emotional. She also doesn't want to contest the notion that 2 women's testimony is necessary to equal that of 1 man's. In Muslim courts, which is similar with other fundamentalist interpretations of other religions as well, I might add. But so there you go. The good news is that these brides are getting told of their rights, such as the rights are, and that more women are applying to do what Ms. Haddad did. The bad news is that Ms. Haddad thinks she's too emotional to be a judge. Bang, 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 bang. Head against the wall. Lots more work to do. And that's it for today. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMClive.com. There you can find the show, plus the archive of all our previous episodes. And we're at iTunes worldwide. There you can stream, download, and subscribe to the show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Regina K. Scully is our founding sponsor. Julie Burton, Women's Media Center President, is executive producer. And I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Don't forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.